I discover my parents stole my doula 200,000 trust fund to support my sister when I exposed them. They got furious and kicked me out of the house. To provide some context, my sister Bessie has Down syndrome. She is 4 years older than me, and I have known for as long as I can remember that my sister was different from me in many ways. Even as a small child, I noted that Bessie would respond strongly to every circumstance. If things didn't go her way, even in minor ways, she would scream and weep in a manner that most children did not. It was as if she couldn't take the frustration of things not levying up to her expectations. Growing up, Bessie had no pals. She had difficulty picking up on social cues and frequently came across as abrupt or even rude. While she wasn't trying to be impolite, her directness could be off-putting to other children who didn't comprehend her situation. As a result, many youngsters preferred to maintain their distance, levying her feeling alienated. As a result, my parents made it a point to include me in her social life, frequently reminding me that I needed to bring her along when I went out with my friend. I realized they wanted her to feel included and have someone to interact with, so I didn't mind vying my elder sister. I felt it would be wonderful for her to have some company and perhaps even make a few friends through my own socials. However, spending time with Bessie in the company of my friends was not easy. Her social skills were weak, and she struggled to integrate into groups. She often acted out in unexpected ways. She would occasionally push or even strike other children, especially if they had something she wanted. As a result, over time, my pals were less interested in hanging out with me if Bessie was also around. They didn't want to deal with her unpredictable behavior, and I understood why. They were merely kids who wanted to play without interruptions or outbursts of hostility. Bessie's impatience and inclination to lash out made things difficult for everyone, and I couldn't blame my friends for backing away from those circumstances. I understood that as her sister, I had a responsibility to support and be there for Bessie, especially given her struggles. But to be honest, I needed space to mature, find my own friends, and live my life independently. However, my parents never let me be myself. Whenever I wanted to do something alone or spend time with my friends without Bessie, they made me feel awful for even considering vying her behind. They'd say things like sisters should stick together, or you need to think about Bessie, she's your sister. It was as if they expected me to always choose her over my friends or anybody else, no matter what I wanted or needed for myself. What made things worse was that they never seemed to put these same efforts into assisting Bessie comprehend how to change her conduct or develop her social skills. They never sat her down to explain why sharing or being compassionate with others could help her connect with others more effectively. Instead, they seemed to accept that I would fill in all of the gaps in her social life. So throughout the years, I became Bessie's lone buddy by default. Don't get me wrong, I adore Bessie, she is family, and I recognize that none of this is her fault. I understand she confronts her own set of obstacles every day, and I can't imagine what it's like to be in her shoes. But at the same time, do you know how it feels to be the invisible child in a family? My parents' entire world revolved around Bessie, with every choice, idea, and money intended to make her life easier and more comfortable. Bessie requires ongoing attention and specialized care. My parents have spent a lot of money on her numerous therapies over the years, including physiotherapy to help with her physical coordination, speech therapy to improve her communication, and occupational therapy to help her develop motor skills. She also gets regular checkups, medical tests, and evaluations to track her progress and keep her health in control. The care she requires is considerable and time-consuming. While I fully grasp its significance, it frequently felt as if there was little place for me. One of Bessie's specific issues is her lack of impulse control, which makes understanding boundaries difficult. For example, she's obsessed with the color pink and enjoys anything pink. She is instantly drawn to anything in that color. She feels impelled to seize it, hold it, and not let go. It doesn't matter whether it's a pink pocketbook, a teddy bear, a piece of clothes, or someone else's prized possession. Once it's in her hands, she clings to it, and if anyone attempts to take it away, she bursts into tears, sometimes vying a full-fledged breakdown. This tendency has resulted in numerous unpleasant situations, particularly while we are out in public. My parents frequently have to bargain with indie VY duels or buy these pink trinkets from complete strangers simply to get Bessie to calm down. I've seen them pay for a variety of strange pink items, some of which are worthless to us but mean everything to Bessie at the time. I understand why they do it, and I understand that it's more than a wish for her. It's practically a need over which she has no control. However, watching my parents devote so much time, money, and mental energy to soothing her urges and satisfy her demands has left me feeling forgotten. Furthermore, my parents' approach to parenting Bessie has had serious ramifications over the years. Their method of keeping her satisfied has devolved into what I can only describe as a shopping addiction for Bessie. It began simply enough. Every weekend, my parents would purchase her something pink, a toy, a piece of jewelry, or another trinket to keep her happy and as a bargaining chip for her cooperation throughout the week. My parents would tell Bessie that she had to be a good girl if she wanted them to give her whatever she wanted, and she would instantly agree. What began as a temporary arrangement quickly evolved into a cherished family ritual. These purchases are not inexpensive either. Many of the goods Bessie desires are one of a kind or custom-made, which frequently requires a significant investment. For a long time, I didn't think about the cost of all this. I thought my parents could afford it. I never questioned how they could afford to continue this habit week after week, year after year, but soon I discovered something I could not have anticipated. My parents had not been managing their expenses through regular budgeting or SAVYNGS. They had been committing fraud to cover the rising prices. You see, when I was born, my grandparents established a trust fund for both me and Bessie, with equal sums given to us. Bessie, who has Down syndrome, was supposed to use the money for her therapies or whatever else she needed, but I was supposed to use mine for college or a down payment on a home. Only my parents had access to these funds, but my grandparents trusted them to handle them carefully. They also made certain that Bessie and I were aware of these trust funds from a young age, allowing us to rely on them for financial support. It was a thoughtful present for my grandparents, and I always felt secure knowing that the trust fund would be available when the time came. When Bessie reached 18, she received a portion of the trust monies. Since she still lives with and relies on my parents, they have been in charge of managing her money. They've utilized her trust fund over the years to assist pay for her treatments and therapies, which have become more demanding as she's gotten older. The money has helped with everything from her medical treatment to providing the materials she requires for daily. I recognize that the money was intended to meet her needs, and I never questioned how it was being spent. When I turned 18, I anticipated getting my half of the trust fund as promised. I had previously planned to utilize the money for my college tuition. Once that was taken care of, I intended to preserve the remainder for any additional bills that would arise as I approached maturity. I had my future planned out, and I was counting on that fund to help me forge a steady route forward. But little did I know my hopes would soon be dashed. My grandparents arranged a fantastic 18th birthday party for me last week. They had done the same for Bessie when she turned 18, so I've been looking forward to my own celebration for quite some time. They had invited everyone in their family. I was genuinely pleased, surrounded by the people I cared about, and it was one of those days when everything felt just right. Following the cake cutting, my grandparents made an announcement to the entire gathering. They told me how proud they were to see me all grown up and gone to college, and that as a birthday present this year, I would receive the trust fund they had put up for me years before. The entire room erupted in cheers and clapping, with everyone praising me on this incredible gift. I felt a rush of exhilaration and thankfulness come over me as I hugged and thanked my grandparents for everything. But in the midst of all the enthusiasm, I saw that my parents were the only ones who did not appear joyful. While everyone else smiled and congratulated me, my parents seemed unconcerned. They stood off to the side, their faces strained, almost uncomfortable. I could see them exchanging glances, and while they didn't say anything, there was a discomfort to them that was difficult to miss. It struck me as peculiar, but in the excitement of the celebration, I didn't give it much thought. I wanted to enjoy the rest of the party, so I put it to the back of my mind. Later that evening, when we got home from the party, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. My parents appeared uptight and didn't speak much with me. Typically, they were concerned about Bessie's health, mood, or anything she needed, but that night, Bessie appeared absolutely satisfied, playing with one of her new gifts. Sensing something else was going on, I finally asked my folks if there was anything wrong. That's when my father gave me a serious look and informed me that he and my mother needed to talk to me. The tone of his voice immediately sent shivers down my spine. I could see he was serious. We sat together in the living room, and they exchanged troubled looks before my father began to talk. He explained, almost tentatively, that they wouldn't be able to give me my trust fund as my grandparents had. I didn't understand what he meant at first, so I asked him to clarify. My father continued, his voice full of shame and despair. He revealed that throughout the years, they had spent all of Bessie's trust fund on her. When there was nothing left, they began to utilize the money from my trust fund, which they had access to. With a big sigh, he revealed that 90 fan tram on my trust fund was already gone, vying little for me. I was taken aback as I considered what he had just stated. The money set aside for my future, for my education, was gone. He went on to say that the majority of money had been spent on my sister's shopping habit and the various treatments she required. As his words sank in, a numbness crept over me. My thoughts raced, attempting to figure out how this happened without my knowledge. They had ripped my trust fund without informing me to cover Bessie's bills and habits. I questioned why they would do something like this. My parents began to justify themselves, their words laced with defensiveness. They informed me that caring for Bessie had cost them a lot of money, but they had no choice but to do it. Her needs have always come first. My father discussed the never-ending expenses, the therapies, treatments, and of course the innumerable gifts she required every week to stay calm. I contended that they could have ceased buying her all of those items when they learned they were financially taxing. They did, however, highlight that for Bessie, these goods were more than just luxuries. They were things that helped her manage and made her world a bit simpler to understand. And for them, every penny spent had been worthwhile. They couldn't simply refuse her. At that point, I felt a rush of rage fill up inside me. I questioned how they could justify spending nearly everything I'd saved for my future without even speaking. Didn't I matter to them? My father tried to calm me down, stating that I needed to comprehend what they had been through. He discussed the stress they'd felt, the sacrifices they'd had to make as Bessie's caregivers, and how difficult it was to satisfy her requirements week after week. My mother nodded, noting that Bessie's condition necessitated continual care, and sometimes that meant spending money in ways that were unfair to me, but were important for Bessie. Both of them felt that because I didn't have any of Bessie's ailments, I had an advantage over her. Therefore, I shouldn't be so greedy with her. I felt a tear of frustration run down my cheek as I assured them that I wasn't doubting Bessie's needs or their decision to prioritize her care. I loved her too, but this was about the lack of honesty, how they had gone behind my back and exploited what was meant to be my future without vying. I informed them that this trust money had been my only source of security, the one thing I felt I could rely on to start my life on my own, and it was now almost completely gone. Instead of addressing how upset and betrayed I felt, they began gaslighting me, turning the subject around on me. They expressed disappointment that I couldn't be more understanding and that as Bessie's sister, I should appreciate that sometimes sacrifices were necessary. They said, "We are all in this together." I was astounded that they wanted me to simply accept it all as a fool, to realize that Bessie's needs had to come first, no questions asked. I questioned them why it was always Bessie and not me. Did they not want me to do anything in my life? That's when my parents revealed a plan they had for my future, which revolves solely around taking on the task of caring for Bessie. They explained that they never cared about my education because it isn't that important. They expected me to step up and help them with Bessie's financial and emotional needs. My mother looked at me with a mix of pleading and resignation, saying, "We're getting older, and it's exhausting looking after Bessie. We won't be able to do this forever, so we need you to step in." She went on to say that they didn't mind if I went to a local college rather than the college of my choice. She only hoped I'd get a steady job as soon as I graduated so I could bring Bessie to live with me. Then she said, we could finally rest. Dad said that I start contributing financially sooner while still in college by working a part-time job and sending money home to Bessie. It would help Bessie have some independence in her life. He told me, by letting her buy whatever it is that she wants and allowing her to maintain the lifestyle we've dead for. I sat there stunned, trying to figure out what my folks expected me to do. At that point, I felt completely misled and frustrated. This was not the future I envisioned for myself. It seemed as if my parents expected me to abandon my own aspirations and plans in order to easily transition into their role as Bessie's caregiver without ever asking what I desired for my own. Finally, I roared at them, my voice quivering with years of accumulated rage and hurt. Have you ever thought about what I want? Or am I just here to live for Bessie? You never even thought to ask me what I wanted, did you? All these years, I've been expected to just give and give, and now you're pushing me to be Bessie's caretaker so you can rest? How is any of this fair? My voice trembled as the rage spilled out. You're making decisions for me without even considering what it means for my life. I can't just drop everything for Bessie and pretend like my dreams don't matter. All of my bottled up anger spilled out, years of feeling forgotten, years of being told I needed to prioritize Bessie, and years of watching them pander to her every whim while I was expected to quietly support from the sideline. My folks constantly attempt to persuade me that I shouldn't be so selfish and inconsiderate. It was as if they wanted me to conform and embrace a life I had never planned for simply because they believed it was better for Bessie. So since last week, I've been completely ignoring my parents. All I feel for them is contempt. Am I the a-hole for reporting my parents for taking my trust fund and spending it on my sister? Update 1. Wow, this post has gone viral in just a few hours. Thank you for all your ad, VYC. I am currently on my way to tell my grandparents everything. Since the trust fund was created with their money, I believe it is critical that I have their support while I confront this. After I've explained everything to them, I plan to let my grandparents decide what we should do. I trust their judgment and know they will have my best interests at heart as we find out how to tackle this together. I had kept my voice shut all these time because I truly believed my folks would finally come around. However, it is evident that they have not. Update 2. It has been 2 weeks since my last update. So, I told my grandparents everything. They were as astonished as I was to learn that my parents had utilized my trust fund without my authorization. That same week, my grandparents came to question my parents about what had happened to my trust fund. My grandparents had worked hard to establish the fund for both me and Bessie. They were deeply committed to ensuring that we have the financial resources we require for our future. They were understandably upset when they discovered that my parents had illegally drained the money behind their backs. My parents answered by telling them the same sob story they had shared with me. They recounted once again how they had been obliged to spend the money on Bessie's care and therapy. They urged my grandparents to explain why they did what they did, as if their rationale would somehow make it all right, but my grandfather would have none of it. He roared at them, his voice filled with fury and amazement. He told them unequivocally that they were accountable for repaying the whole trust fund, regardless of the circumstances or justifications. He was visibly angry and felt betrayed by my parents' conduct. For a moment, I hoped they'd finally accept responsibility and set things right. Then, frightened, my mother came to my grandparents and began pleading with them. She indicated that caring for Bessie was difficult and that her needs were numerous and frequent. She stated that Bessie's trust money was insufficient to support the increasing cost of her treatments and ongoing bills. She rationalized taking my trust fund by claiming it helped them care for Bessie, and then in an almost horrible twist of fate, my parents turned against me. They reprimanded me for telling my grandparents everything. They were upset that I had revealed their active VY ties and forced them to face the repercussion. My dad in particular was furious. He told me with a strong edge in his voice that I should consider myself fortunate since I was born normal, unlike Bessie, and that I shouldn't despise her sister so much. It was as if my entire life, my challenges and needs didn't matter. Everything revolved around Bessie, and now I was being punished for not fitting in with the role they had chosen for me without thinking. I looked them in the eye and told them straight out that if they didn't give me back the money I owed, I would sue them and make sure they went to jail for their action. I reminded them that what they did was illegal and there was no way they could justify it in court. They couldn't prove otherwise that the trust fund was intended for me and only me. My tone was calm, but my comments were plain and firm. I could see the color drain from my parents' faces as they comprehended what I had just spoken. For the first time, I genuinely stood up for myself, and I could see the shock in their faces. They were not used to me being that straightforward, so resolute. Fortunately, my grandparents nodded in accord. They supported me because they knew I was correct. Seeing their encouragement, I persisted, speaking with greater conviction. I told my parents that it didn't matter how much they spent on Bessie or what they did for her. Bessie was their child, and it wasn't my obligation to give up my future for her. I love Bessie, of course, and I would always be there for her, but I wasn't going to sacrifice my own life, education, and goals just to make her feel cared for. I made it plain that I was tired of always coming second to her, of being overlooked while her needs were always prioritized. I finished by declaring I was done with her. I had had enough of being treated like the invisible child who was expected to meekly accept whatever scraps were left for. For the first time in my life, I stood up for myself, and I knew I could never take it back. My parents had pushed me to my limit, and I was not going to allow them to continue to dictate my life. My father instantly disagreed, his voice full of shock and anger, insisting that I couldn't threaten them with jail. He told me that as their child, I should have family loyalty and be willing to support them at all times, especially after everything they had done for me over the years. His statements were intended to make me feel guilty and to remind me of my responsibilities. My mother, attempting to ease the situation, even waited in proposing that since there was still 10 fan tram on my trust fund remaining, I could simply accept it and keep my mouth shut. It felt like they were treating me like a charity case, as if the residual crumbs from my trust fund were all I deserved and I should forget about anything else. But my granddad refused to back down. He came in, his voice stern, and informed my parents that if they didn't agree to give me back the full amount, he would get the best lawyer in town to sue them. The possibility of legal action appeared to have had a significant impact on my parents. They eventually became silent, recognizing my grandfather meant business. After a tense exchange, they reluctantly admitted that what they had done was incorrect nonetheless. They begged my grandparents for some time to consider things over. However, the ramifications didn't stop there. My father was furious with me for exposing them to my grandparents and threatening him and mom with jail time. In his rage, he declared that he never wanted to see my face again. He urged me to leave his house, stating he had had enough of supporting a selfish person, like someone who could backstab their own family like this. When my grandparents heard this, they quickly offered to have me move in with them. They assured me that I always had a home with them and that they would help me in every way they could as I worked out my next steps. So, without hesitation, I packed my clothing, gathered my necessary documents, and moved out of my parents' house. Currently, I live with my grandparents. I hate that my parents have just kicked me out, but I'm also relieved to be away from them. I miss Bessie a lot. I'm aware that what I did has permanently damaged my relationship with my family. However, I do not regret standing up for myself.